Now, I had a client of mine just sent me a letter saying, are you going to be talking about technology and batteries and these sort of things? And just coincidentally happens that we are going to be talking about that. So this is The Economist magazine talking about the internal combustion engine and whether or not it's roadkill, and the impact of battery technology and electric vehicles on our lives. So, it's a really interesting thing. I was looking at various technologies in the past. I don't know if you know when the internal combustion engine was actually created. According to Wikipedia, it was 1859. And it's an interesting thing about technologies. You can look at them and say, boy, that's amazing. I've never seen anything like that before. Everybody's going to want one of those. Well, it took 50 years from that in 1859 for Henry Ford to create the first mass production car. And I found out as well, just because I kind of like to look at trivia, the first color television was created in 1923. And I remember getting ours in 1968 and thinking, oh, yeah, like we're like the fourth on the block. I thought that was pretty special. And then I found out that the first cell phone created by Motorola was in 1973 and weighed 2 kilograms. So, when you think about technology, the adoption of the technology often is a lot slower than people think. But when it gets traction, it can take off like a hockey stick. So I mention that because there's this really good paper that we got not too long ago by a group out of the US called Rethink. And the whole paper is about transportation as a service. So they're not just talking about electric vehicles, they're talking about automated electric vehicles. Let me just give you some of the observations they make. And these are predictions they think will occur by 2030. First off, 95% of all passenger miles will be not electric vehicles, but automated electric vehicles by then. It will increase family income in the US by almost $6,000 a year, 10% of their current income, $1 trillion a year of additional discretionary spending. There will be minimal production of internal combustion engines or individual ownership of cars. There'll be 40% of the fleet, but only 5% of passenger miles traveled. And automatic electric vehicles will be able to last 500,000 to 1 million miles before they have to be replaced. They'll be 4 to 10 times cheaper than owning an internal combustion engine. I don't know. This is something that surprised me. Uber and Lyft apparently already transport 500,000 passengers per day in New York City. And they expect, and this is the biggest thing I looked at here, the passenger fleet in the US will drop from 240 million to 44 million. And we're only talking 12 years from now. 70% fewer cars are going to be manufactured, 50% more miles will be traveled, but at a $1 trillion savings. Oil demand could drop by 30 million barrels a day. The price of oil could drop to $25, making a lot of the global oil today uneconomic to ever bring out of the ground. It's interesting we're having all of these pipeline discussions because according to them, if what they say is true, Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines would be redundant. Energy requirements would drop by 80%, emissions by 90%. Obviously, a huge impact on the oil industry, autos, trucks, and auto insurance. Now, it's hard to know if these things are going to play out, but the thing is you want to be able to pay attention to the probability. So here's a couple of things that are impacted. Oil dependency. What's in the orange is the uneconomic oil available to all of these countries, and the blue is the commercially viable oil that would exist if these conditions occurred. So let's look at Canada. 60% of our oil would stay in the ground. It wouldn't be able to come out at a price that would make any sense. And if we take a look at how many countries are dependent on oil, and this is a theme we'll come back to, the Saudis, 39% of their national income comes from oil. In the case of Russia, 15%. In the case of Canada, 5%. In the case of the US, 1%. Yet the US, along with the Saudis and the Russians, are all generating more than 10 million barrels a day of oil. The difference is that the Americans don't need the income. So they're the only country that is a producer of oil at this level that doesn't really need the income, which is a very significant difference. So if their production dropped to 5 million barrels a day because the oil simply wasn't needed, it really wouldn't make much difference to them. it will make a big difference to everybody else. Now, there's a flip side. There's another paper that came out recently from BMO saying that all of these dire warnings about what's going to happen to electric vehicles will take a lot longer to take place. And it's worth reading. It has a different opinion about the fact that the transportation, road transport in particular, only uses 45% of oil, that other areas will still continue to grow, petrochemicals, aviation, marine, and that may be true. What we want to look at, these are the questions we want to consider. When will this occur? Who are the winners and losers going to be in this outcome? What's the impact on related products and services? And what's the impact on the overall portfolio mix? So we don't have answers to all of these questions. This is something we're going to be paying attention to, but obviously we want to be on the right side of the way this turns out. Another aspect of this is renewable energy. Now, right now, the U.S. generates 18% of its energy from renewable resources, and about 50% of that is hydro. The rest is mainly solar and wind. And when we take a look at what's going on in the rest of the world, solar is getting big, as is wind, in many other countries, especially in countries like India and China, who are huge importers of oil. And the cost of solar power in particular is dropping precipitously. In fact, the largest investor in value-add manufacturing for solar are the Chinese, 6 times as much as the US is. So if you think about it, there are 80 countries in the world, as of last year, 80 countries in the world that imported oil, and a very small handful of countries who export oil. So all those countries that import oil, if they didn't have to import the oil and pay the foreign currency that they pay for the oil, they would choose not to. If this technology could be made to work, forgetting about issues like global warming, countries will choose to use this as their source of power because they will be independent. And when we take a look at solar power, this is another area where the U.S. sort of wins. These are areas around the world that are likely to generate the best solar power outcomes. And those little black dots you're looking at are population centers of 1 million. So you not only want to generate solar and wind power, but you want to generate it close to population areas. This is the U.S., and that's China. Again, from a potential perspective, the U.S. has far more solar potential than any other developed country in the world. So what will get in the way? Well, we know things are going to get cheaper. Solar is already cheaper than coal or natural gas in terms of generating power. It's just not particularly reliable. So the challenge is this. You need a battery. And batteries are going to need technology to work. And that's occurring. At some point in time, this is worth solving as a problem because there are so many countries that would benefit from being able to use solar power, store it in batteries, and essentially use that as their electric grid. All right, so let's take a little turn here. David talked about planning issues. One of the things that we think is really important is that you have the information necessary to make the right decision. So just recently, we've redone our client website to turn it more into what we call a client dashboard. So instead of every 3 months getting an updated statement saying, well, how am I doing? What is my rate of return? And how, what's my total value of my portfolio? This is something that you can look up now on a daily basis. You can drill down and take a look at how individual accounts are performing. You can store documents there and get access to any of the publications that we've done as well. In addition to that, you can look at the details of any particular account and get what's called performance attribution. You can find out which pools, which assets are performing better than others so that you get an idea of where the contributions are coming from. You can see your returns both on a calendar basis and over an extended period of time. You can see the cash flow and the taxable portion in your portfolio, get information regarding your net worth, if you've given us the information to put together a workbook, and retirement and estate projections, along with details of any insurance policies that you have. So our objective is to try to make this a place where before you make decisions about an investment strategy, you understand exactly the position that you're in.